Did you roll?
I'll introduce.
Oh, sure, Shan. Of course.
So excited to be back with Seed Library. It seems like it's been forever. It's been forever. You know, it was 2 years ago, and then we had a couple little classes last fall. But let's hope that this Corona is out of our lives for a while and we can move forward. And this is a new year, new start. We're going to go strong, and we're starting out with a star here. So Wayne is one of our newer master gardeners, but he is a well-experienced gardener. And if you were on our garden tour 2 years ago,
Pre-COVID, 19.
yeah, of 19, his garden was on our garden tour. And he has a unique way of planting. He plants varieties that I had never known existed.
Now you know.
So I'm really excited that Wayne's going to start us out. We've had to fill out new applications. We hope to have seeds. Now, it's all kind of strange and we're starting all over. If you have seeds that you'd like to contribute to us, we're more than welcome to take anything and everything to share with all of our participants, because we need to really build up our stash here, and because we're kind of starting from zero again. So I also want to let you know that on Tuesday, the 22nd, Master Gardeners are going to have our spring fling out at the country club, and we're going to have the gardener, main gardener from the Mercurry Gardens up in Brookings, and he's going to talk about his test plants that he's had up there. So if they can grow them in Brookings and they do well up there, they'll do well here in Yankton. So there might be some new varieties of things that we're going to hear about that we don't know about. So that should be a real good program. And of course, we're going to be back strong every, what is it, third Thursday of the month. During the summer, the library closes early, so we will not be having evening classes. We'll only be having afternoon classes during the summer. If you didn't pick up a brochure, pick up a brochure so you know when and what our programs are. And make sure you invite all your gardening friends to join us, because I think we have a really fun time.
Yes.
And Wayne's going to make it really
We'll
fun.
have fun.
And he's going to challenge us with our bee knowledge.
Well, this is challenging me.
You said March 22nd, what time?
At 7 o'clock
7 o'clock.
up at Hillcrest.
Country.
Yep. And so we are the Seed Library. We're going strong. I think we're still the only ones in South Dakota, although we've had some contacts. Some of the other communities are looking at our success and want to join in. So, but Wayne is going to be a powerhouse presenter.
We'll see.
And or are you just full of hot air?
Well, yeah, I was careful. I was careful in prepping for this.
So this year should be a great year, and Wayne is going to be a great programmer. Yeah, look at these beans. Oh my God, look at these beautiful beans.
Flyer for the spring break, like I have one in my car.
That would be great. Yeah,
Okay.
just to put up.
We can get it after. Okay, well, thanks, Shannon. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It is good it's fun to talk about gardening, and as my wife knows, I can talk for hours and hours, but we have about an hour today, and there's quite a bit to get through. For those of you, I don't know who's we've got online, but I would, especially in prepping for this, if you had beans last night, I'd encourage you to mute your microphones online. Yeah, so at any rate, I'm going to take you on quite a journey. I'm always interested in the history of history of any of these vegetables, where they come from, the roots of our food. So you're going to hear a little bit about that. For those of you, I'm going to grab some from that basket. For those of you in the room, maybe we'll do more of these for tonight, but so you feel free to grab more. But I did bring some shelled beans, because part of it is I want you to experience just the different varieties of even the pods. Like here, I can tell you this is my guess is it's a ram's horn, just by the shape of the pod. But so there's a lot of neat things just from the pods alone. And from that, but first of all, recognizing it's St. Patty's Day, I did do a little bit of research. I was looking for green beans, not just the kind of ones you eat in the can, which are a lot of them. We do have two varieties up here. One is the Mbambo, which is a really neat bean, recently from Africa. I say recently because it's not more than 500 years ago. And another one is, I don't know if I have it here, but the Fort Portal jade, also from Africa. So green beans. But one of the things I wanted you to know, I was looking for Irish recipes as well, because despite, well, even with COVID, I thought, well, I'm not going to do a sampling, but as I was looking for, you know, what are there actually are quite a few recipes about stews and things like that, cabbage, bean stews, that type of thing for the Irish. And I was thinking, well, what is this about leprechauns always playing tricks and whatnot? And you always hear about the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Well, it does turn out actually another stew that the Irish are famous for is called the 239 bean stew. And I was like, what? So it's 239. And as the legend goes, mother was helping her daughter prepare, and she said, oh yes, we like lots of diversity in our bean stew. And the daughter's like, well, Mom, but why exactly 239? And she's like, oh, lassie, if we put one more in, it'd be 240. So that's the Irish stuff for today. One other thing before I get started. You know, again, thanks for your time today. I also do want to, you know, talking about roots. I, you know, recognize my roots, my heritage. My mother and father often talk about it. Next door here in Yankton, South Dakota, I remember going into Gurney's, walking on the creaky floors, the quasi, you know, the popcorn in there as you walked in. But the one thing I really remember also is the 1-cent seed packets, the variety pack. And I always had my row in the garden back on the farm around Wagner, South Dakota. So that's, you know, now I'm doing this type of thing with beans, tomatoes, you name it, lots of different varieties from around the world. But, you know, those roots are important to me, from my mother and father, my grandparents, some of the aunts did as far as gardening. So in your hands, you had a chance to hold one of these. Hopefully you cracked it open. If not, but I want you to think about, you know, we're going to, as I said, we're going to get into the history. Then I'll talk about some of the growing characteristics, but where these come from. And so as you sit here, think about the, you know, basically the evolution, the literally millions of years, the 8,000 years of domestication, the trips some of these beans have taken, and the different people that utilize them still today. And I'll share a couple stories behind some of them as well. So when we, the common genus for beans that we're going to be talking about mostly today is Phaseolus. And what you see here is a map of species richness, meaning what is the density of original undomesticated wild species. And you see a lot of that in Mesoamerica, basically the Guatemala, Mexico, especially centered around some of that Mexico area. So there's really, it's been through genetic work, archaeology, really the wild populations and ultimate domestication really happen in two places, both at Mesoamerica and then also in the Andes. So when you think of Lima, Peru, another place, but the broad sense of beans also came from those two regions. So when we're thinking about the beans, 95% of what you see here is the common bean, the vulgaris, and that was actually named by Linnaeus back when it came. I'll get into the whole European thing later. But one of the other things that's important to know with common beans, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the mating system. People often talk about saving seeds, and you know, things like tomatoes. Yeah, it'd be great to save them, squashes, but if you ever watch squash, they come out different the next year. The nice thing with most of these beans is their breeding system is autogamous, meaning the gametes come from the same parent. So I can tell you this Ojo de Tiger, the tiger's eye bean. I've grown that for several years. It's the same stock. The beans have always stayed true. There's a 1,500-year-old cave bean up here. Those not so much. One of the things with beans too and growing them it is good to keep them separate. I'm on a half acre. Last year I grew about 50 varieties. So I did see some unique crosses, which we'll get to see later today. But the common bean, again, geographic, the wild forms, that Mesoamerica, Mexico, South America. And if you and the other important thing to look at is where is it adapted to? It's, oops, I jumped ahead here. Fairly mesic temperate. So really our climate is also good for that. You'll see a little bit of difference as we go further down here. The lima bean, we have a couple of these here. This one actually from the Great Lakes area, but the Christmas pole lima, both of these are really, really productive beans. Pole beans that grow 12 feet high, incredible. But it does say warm and humid. It still do really well in this region. Again, originating from some of those same places, predominantly autogamous, meaning again they're staying true. Like these Potawatomis, that's third or fourth year, staying true to character. The runner bean, some of you may, I think some folks have got the runner bean, have grown it around here. I believe it's the hyacinth. It's one of the varieties, but yeah. So generally cool and humid, but also, you know, if you look at it too, one of the things you may see with that allogamous, it's meaning it has a propensity towards an ability to cross over a bit. And then this one here, I haven't grown. I looked at some seeds, but if you look at where it grows, so when you get down into some of the New Mexico, Arizona, these Tepary beans, this is a bean that's really adapted to really dry, almost desert conditions. And so, but it's really important to those folks. It takes a long time to cook. I may try that at some point, but it is one, you know, that there's still wild forms out there, and an important bean for a lot of those cultures down in that region, partly because of the climate and how it's adapted to those regions. A fairly recent one, the yerbean, that was, I think, a cross between a runner and a, I'm mistaken, I don't have my notes up here, but this runner bean, I think it was identified within the last decade or two, but it's really a very small area where it is and not real abundant. But again, you know, some of the things that I look for is, again, where is that adapted to? Fairly cool and humid. Again, some of that same region where it comes from. Also, you know, it doesn't stay true. A lot less common, but it is, you know, it is utilized for some production. So we talked a little bit about where the beans come from. They actually, you know, the wild varieties, they started showing up 5-6 million years ago, but domestication through basically archaeological findings or work, some of the genetics, when you see this divergence of wild bean populations, you know, down into South America, 165,000 years ago, but about 8,000 years ago, there's evidence of domestication. I'll show you some maps on that here in a bit. So one of the unique beans, which you see in that picture there, this is me last night trying to find it, 1,500-year-old cave bean. This one was found in, you know, I mentioned the domestication began about 8,000 years ago. So that was happening a lot in the Mesoamerica, Mexico, Guatemala, the Andes. This bean here, they found in New Mexico in a pot with pitch in it, and they're able to, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, were they actually able to grow it from those? I don't know, but or was it one that was carried on for years? But a pretty neat variety. I will say this one I've grown several times. I think it needs to be by itself a little bit more. It seems like it does cross over a bit. But the other thing you see here too is in that diorama from a New York State Museum, the combination of the three sisters, where folks are growing, or the natives were growing corn, maize, and squashes together. So this is, to me, this was an interesting, I want to explain this a bit because it points to not only can you use archaeological, but when you think about the histories of the Americas and the native peoples, a lot of it comes from oral histories. And what I found really interesting about this article is where paleobiolinguistics, so basically ancient linguistics, the words they used, how did they date that back to when these beans were domesticated? So you'll see for some of the proto-languages where they did have words that were utilized, and it also shows the family affiliation. But as we start looking at the maps, the size of the circle indicates, how long ago that was, 8,000 years ago. And then if you see a red dot, that's where they do have the, a proto word for beans. So when did it start showing up in the dialect? So if we look into Mexico and basically that Mesoamerica, a long time ago, especially where you look at where that species richness was really high, 8,000 years ago, and lots of evidence for, not only from the archaeological record, but also from the words that people were using. And kind of to a little bit lesser extent, but in South America, in the Andes, in Peru, again, you can see the different sizes of this. But 8,000 to 1,000 years ago, this was happening basically in the Americas. Closer to home, we've often heard of the Mandan, Hidatsa, Auricula, the three affiliated tribes, the folks living along the rivers. So evidence of that, both, not only from archaeological, but also from the words that were used. I think they've zoomed in on western South Dakota, but where a lot of those tribes lived along the Missouri River, just upriver from here. But also you see some of the eastern tribes and even the western tribes. I'd be interested to see if for this Ojibwa tribe, this Potawatomi, which I mentioned earlier, that's actually, it's adapted to the Great Lakes region where they used to inhabit. So, and a good being again for here because it's fairly short season. So that kind of covers the Americas with beans, but obviously I don't like to use the term discovered because cultures were here for thousands of years. When Europeans came here, it was, they basically about 500 years ago, beans were brought back. So a lot of these beans, when you hear about some of the Italian dishes, many of these beans, they went back overseas about 500 years ago, across the pond, if you will, and those cultures picked them up, basically spreading across the globe. So some of the, again, the history of this, in 1586, where this first started showing up, the Drake manuscript, basically an illustration of the natives showing not only the corn, the pineapples, the gourds, but over here you see the beans climbing, the bean growth there. A prayer book from the Queen of France from 1508, the first drawings of some of the beans in some of those prayer books. In Fuchs in 1542. So this is the time when Linnaeus actually gave the name to beans, Phasia, the vulgaris, basically common bean. And Linnaeus is, when you see these Latin names, he thought, well, this is common in Europe. It actually wasn't until, in his lifetime, it had become common. But, there are also beans that some of the cowpeas, the hummus, garbanzo, yes, yeah. Those are different types. They're not the Phaseolus variety. So those beans come from Africa, some from China area. But what was really interesting about this too, again, getting into the history, where I'm taking a deep dive and thinking about where you come from, where these beans come from. In 1500, this Valeriano in Italy, Pope Clement VII, for his work, he gave him a bag of beans and he took them back and started growing them. He actually said, these are too valuable, too precious. They shouldn't be a gift for a common gardener like me. They should be held by cardinals. And in Latin here, I read on basically that last line says, the beans, they're so beautiful, they mimic ebony, ivory, gold. And so some of the common terms, sometimes we hear poor man's jewels. So no doubt even back in the 1500s, some of the Europeans were experiencing that. So to me, people ask, well, what do you do with these? Actually, I'll save seeds, but we eat a lot of bean soup and make some, there's a member in the audience here who's tasted some of the crostini with, a really good Christmas pole lima cooked on it. So, not only are they beautiful, but the beans are important. If you look at dry bean production, when you look at grain legumes, so the beans, soybeans, certainly a lot more million metric tons there, about 348 million worldwide. This is from the Food and Agriculture Organization from 20. But beans, dry beans like these, about 30 million metric tons a year are produced worldwide. So if you look at the countries where this happens, India, Myanmar, lots of beans produced in the United States. But the importance of these beans to some of these cultures, when you look at protein and what's available, for instance, in Rwanda, I don't know, I know even though I grow this many beans, I know as far as protein, they don't make up a large portion of my diet, but in Rwanda, they make up about 60% of the diet for Rwandans. So an important cultural, not only for cultural purposes, but for sustenance and for survival in some of these developing countries. So some of the basics, how do you grow them? How many of you ever in kindergarten, if you can remember we're back that long, remember putting a bean in a styrofoam cup and watching the dicots pop out? Yeah, I thought about doing that 2 weeks ago, but you can see, that happening here. And, some of the different, beans are fairly simple to grow. There's a couple key things though. They like it warm. They don't want to be, they're not good transplanted, even though you started in styrofoam cups to see the growth, plant them outside when it's warm. I always think, any seed, basically a doubling of depth, so an inch or two deep. Lots of times you see about soaking seeds. I soak some of my peas, but what I saw on this work was out of an extension office said, soaking seeds, you could actually damage some of these. So when you think about putting them in the dirt, if you're peeling off some of the outer seed membranes, etc. One of the important things too, I've dealt with this again, concentrated, when I'm concentrating crops, I'm looking like, where can I fit 50 varieties of beans in? I just till up more yard. But yeah, Gentinia, not so much, but once the grass is gone, the grass is gone. So at any rate, so one of the things with that too then is space is important, and you see at the bottom here, water evenly, avoid, and I'm sure I've made these mistakes where I watered it in the evening so you can allow some of the diseases to get in. Also density, so they're getting air circulation so they can drop. If you could water them all from the ground, it would be much better. So density types of watering are critical to that. So one of the things I didn't mention earlier, but with the common bean, different varieties of growth, and I'll share some pictures of structures, but the bush bean, most folks are familiar with that, but a very, very simple system. And when Jan mentioned how I grow things, I basically do raised beds, but mounds that I can reach, so about 5 feet across, 20 feet wide or so, or in irregular shapes. And then pretty much when you think about poles or so I've mentioned semi-runners here, 4 to 6 feet tall, poles, 12 feet tall, and even beyond that, get a ladder out to harvest them come fall. But, like here, I'm using a Miscanthus giganticus. Basically, I wish we could grow bamboo here, but we can't. But it's a heavy grass that I take the stalks off in the springtime, tie them up, especially for those semi-runners like the Ojo de Tigers, these candy beans. I only need to make a structure that tall and they'll fill that up. And it'll support them enough. The Uganda Bantu is another one. So for pole beans, you can see where I'm starting them down here. I look for heavier structures. So there's a pergola I built, but also, and here again, you see some of the structures. So here I'm using corn stalks, simply, just tying them up. This is obviously from this fall. A maple tree that was shading my garden too much, it's now providing support for beans. Used a lot of the upper limbs to build bean structures. And as I mentioned, this is getting up there about 12 feet tall where you see those beans. So I don't do I tried the Three Sisters a couple times, but squash can take over a lot of room. So I do what I call the Two Sisters a lot. So wherever I plant a lot of varieties of corn. Wherever I'm planting corn, I'm also planting beans. And then a great variety for supporting structures is broom corn. Obviously, broom corn here. Some of you may be familiar with it as cane in this part of the region, but it's actually what they use to make brooms before it's seeded out. But you can see these. I know these are Good Mother Stollards, a great climbing bean, but that's a real solid structure. Doesn't blow over in the wind. Good birds feed come fall, and come next year, those stalks can become a small structure to support other beans. Here you see. I know that this is from this summer. That's that candy, the big pink kidney-shaped bean. But so that's about a 4 or 5 foot tall structure, really filling in, and it doesn't take a lot of beans to fill it in. This one is an Italian, a really pretty purple Italian one. I like to find it too. Starts with an F. So I know there's a few in there. Well, I think I brought it on. Anyway, you'll see it later because I do have pictures of 50 some odd varieties we'll run through at the end. But I get a good climbing bean. Oops, I went backwards here. So yeah, same thing here. The Ojo de Tiger. So as these grow, one of the things you do want to watch for, especially with bush beans in our climate, because when we get those summer rains, anything that's growing on the ground, you're going to really want to watch for. As far as harvest, you don't want to harvest them too early. You want them to mature, get to that point where actually they are crackly like this, but you want to get there right away. So if it does rain or if you're going to water, you're taking off these pods at the time. Here's the Ojo de Tiger, they're the tiger's eye, that pretty yellow one. Another thing I do, neat successional planting actually. I use some corn cribbing from the farm, basically made a fence. So any fence I have at our place becomes a structure, but I did a spiral corn cribbing. And early in the season, those will support sugar snap peas, any types of peas that climb 4 feet tall. But as the season wears on, I'm planting bean. But as it warms up, the peas will be going in here in a month or so. A month later, I'll plant peas right outside that and some corn. So basically, as those peas are dying, the beans are overtaking them. And an earlier picture would have shown peas here, but this here is a interesting spot. I don't remember the variety growing here, but that corn cribbing is about this tall, and the beans kept growing. And so you can see I used parachute cord, ropes, poles, and made a structure that eventually filled in. You can see that partially here. I like this picture here. Obviously early season, but again, those beans climbing up, filling those. Now no more shading, but now supporting my garden maple tree. Just some of the pretty bean, the flowers. Oh, I guess I used that slide twice, but this here is actually a garbanzo, so not a phaseolus, but the blossom on that was absolutely, to me, eye-catching there. Some of the pods, I think you actually may see some of those in there. Dragon's tongue, Kresgevic would be, simply beautiful. They actually do maintain a bit of color as they dry if they have the right conditions, but pretty breathtaking as you walk through the garden. So I don't think this video plays, but this is my main garden. And so when I talked about the corn cribbing, that's this spiral structure here, the parachute cord. Some of these are tomato cages, but all the fences along here support beans, some of the pergolas, some of those maple structures. But that gives you an aerial view of that. I'm just going to see if this video plays quick because it does kind of, it's not going to work. That's all right. So I mentioned the Potawatomi. This is the pumpkin patch that does keep expanding into the yard. So here you see early season, and I've grown Potawatomis in this spot a couple of years now, but you can see them coming up here by midsummer. Again, a fairly rapid growing bean. This is one you want to get after too. So Well, yeah, actually, here's a pod. One of the things I would say with Potawatomis, this variety here, you can watch them. Once they start drying, and if it's a hot day, they'll snap and spiral. So it's a dispersal mechanism. But so you want to be on top of these as they're drying. You can literally shake the structure, and you can hear where your beans are. But not only can you hear them, and as they're maturing, some pretty shots of the beans forming inside there. But again, the productivity of this, just that little structure, I think it's more than double that harvest. You can see all the pods, the thick, heavy levels. So again, that one comes from the Great Lakes. So it was adapted, that tribe utilized that up there. And obviously probably a shorter growing season than ours, 70 to 80 days, where they're able to get a good harvestable, storable crop. And again, just that blue tote there filled after a short picking, and then opening up to reveal the poor man's jewels. And what do you do with them after you harvest them? You find so yeah, you don't want to store them in a humid place. So a garage in brown paper bags, because you can't, you're rolling through this. So, I thanks to Hy-Vee, every time paper or plastic, I was taking paper and then some. But but another key thing when you're growing this many varieties, what I was doing also was labeling each of these bags, because I'm getting pretty good at some of the varieties, identifying them, but there are some that are pretty close. So it's important, I just simply carry a pencil in the field with me and go through, and as I'm picking these, and this was a great way to store them. And I will tell you, it's, to me, whether it's crocheting, knitting, fiddling, shelling beans in the wintertime while I'm watching a football game or a movie or something, it's a really cathartic thing. Some of them, Good Mother Stollards, they can be a little rough on the thumbs. Some of them, Lowry's Special Snap, very light husk. But again, this is a good way to store them and work through them over the course of the season. So this is what you saw as you came into the door. Again, I mixed these up. I saved a few as I was shelling this winter, so that, knowing I was going to give this talk, glad COVID's quasi over. We're back after that 8 weeks. Was it last 2 years ago we said we're going to be on? Yeah. 2 weeks? Okay, yeah. So again, the harvest. Going to roll through these, but the pods, even when you're growing them, that's that dragon's tongue, those really long, super long pods, but that's what they look like, in the green. And then a really neat, excuse me, I said dragon's tongue, ram's horn is that one. Obviously makes sense given the color, the shape of it. This one here, a new bean I grew for the first time this year. And if you look at this in the sunlight, the blue of the sacre blue, it's just an absolutely magnificent midnight blue. But again, a really, really productive bean as well. Just growing on my fence there, a few seeds netted that quart jar almost full. I'll talk about the Zuni Shalaka and non-Agnes, but just pictures of the harvest, the shelling. More of that. The Mabambo, I know a couple of you had that. One of my favorite beans up there with my thumb in the picture, the Kresgevic, coming from the Slovenia area. It's just an absolutely beautiful bean. And I talk about the crosses. I'll try, as we start rolling through the slides, I'll go through that. And where do these beans come from? The Ping Zebra, that's one that was developed in China. That one there it's a long bean. I didn't grow it last year because I got my garden in late, but I have some seeds. We're talking probably 110, 120 days, and it's pushing it to get it in. One of the gentlemen I secure seeds from out of Chicago, he said he'll actually take the plant by the roots and bring it into the garage, so they're curing on that vine instead of curing just in the pod. Collection not from this year, that was from last year. The collection continues to grow, but I do like to share these because, and I do have, if some of you want to take some beans home, I have some packets of seeds here, and feel free to grab some more of these pods because I have another stash for tonight. But a simple start of 4 or 5 beans, especially like those Potawatomis, or the ram's horn, you name it. They can be really productive and start you on your way to something like this if you like.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Are all of these beans, are you able to eat the pod, or are they grown for the protein source of it?
Good, yeah, so for the pod, the question was about, can you eat the pod? There are a few of these that are meant. The rattlesnake, I was talking to a lady earlier about some of the varieties as far as eating the pod. The rattlesnake, I got this from a guy down in Alabama. Incredible nutty flavor that produces all year long. So in general, I'm growing this mostly for the eating them as a green snap bean, if you will. But it was just great, eating it out of the garden. Or another one that I didn't get to eat the pod because I was so busy with harvest and gardening, but the Lowry special snap. I mean, it's called a snap because you can snap it. And that's like one that where the pod is really light and papery. So obviously there's not a lot of fiber and it wouldn't be a rough texture. So some of them you can, and really you could eat them all as a pod, but some of them are a little bit more designed for that. So yes, good question though. So actually, could one of you hit the lights? So now we're going to, I know I've talked a bit, and this is going to, there's about 8 seconds a slide. So we're going to basically, you're going to get a chance to see the Fort Cordell Jade and African bean, basically going through some of the varieties I grow. The eye of the goat, Ojo de Cabra. This is one that comes from Italy, Nana Grandma Agnes's blue. This Luster Palm or Greasy Grit, a gentleman I met in a seed group, he sent me that one, the rattlesnake. And I've been watching some of the Netflix movies about chefs, and he actually sent me this next one I think you'll see here. I'm looking for the heritage, and he said this Dobbins green, another snap bean, but also a beautiful bean. He said, my grandma used to grow these. She got them from a gentleman who grew them for like 30, 40 years. So some of that heritage of stories. The goose gullet, found in a goose's gullet. Here's that sacre blue. That's that color. It just pop it, especially when you first harvest them. It really, really pops. It's Kresgevic. So what you're going to see next after this one, I mentioned sometimes they cross or sometimes you see variants. So I really like this one, but I've had 2 variants, and I'm checking to see if they maintain the characteristics. So for the first time, I may not have a pause, so I'm going to have to hit the button here. So last year, I call it the Kresgevic Purple Rain, Prince, but it's a really pretty variety, and it stayed true to that variant, and also the pallid. Both of those are derivatives off that Kresgevic, and so it's in the second year coming from that. This is one that I don't know. The first year came out, Gioia Galacia, which is Italian for purple galaxy. We'll see. And some of these I haven't named. I just put little codes up there to. So what you're seeing now is some of the crosses I've seen. Again, I'm growing these close. This is a real close to a Moncella, but it does have a little bit of a famous Italian bean because it's really thin-skinned. PBJ, can you guess what that stands for?
Does it taste like that?
No, not, yeah, what do they taste like? Cerny, that's Czech for black. So we'll see, again, this is a real neat, thick black bean that showed up. And I'm not sure I'll test all of these, but again, yeah, this one, even though it's a little bit different, but you see the little flecks in there, so it almost has that little star-like appearance in there, and they, they show up like, fairly neat. This one's starting to trend towards purple. There's a purple one later that I saved towards the end, but there is hints of purple in that. And this one is a lot like that Kresgevic, only it's a little bit browner and a lot smaller. And you'll find that in certain plants will have that. I will say I might have just lost the name on this one, but I again, labeling things going on. The Jumbo Polish are great. really thick bean, a great pole bean. Again, I started with a few seeds. So this is one from the Netherlands. It grows in the forest, Netherlands, a bush variety. So the Friesland, the northern part, I don't know that it's going to be adapted real well. The succotash, a great pole bean, real thick, almost looks like a kernel of corn, but a great, cooked. First year for the Ohio pole, pretty prolific one. Christmas pole lima, that's that one that you'll see in here. Real prolific producer. Pretty common, you can find that out there. This was that Italian one, the purple one, that had a picture of the blossoms and the beans starting out. These Kishwaukes are a little bit hard to tell apart. There's a green and then there's a Bamberger blue that's those. This is a low growing, basically almost like a bush bean. It does spread a bit, fairly slight. Good Mother Stoller, if you want a bean that's going to be productive and really produce a lot, make great soups, that's a pretty standard one. Given the Czech heritage, I know it's about the colors, but polka. And German heritage. This is one of the ones that in Italy is pretty. I mean, they say it's not that common, but you can find it on the internet. And but the taste and the texture of it's supposed to be pretty fine. This is a bush bean that does pretty well. There's that ram's horn you saw earlier. Again, just really thick pods. It's almost amazing to watch them grow. And take a little bit of time to dry too. The Mayflower went over from Mesoamerica to the New World, came back probably with the Mayflower, a bean that they grew. Real productive bean there, that Rosa is looking pretty too. So part of it is, for me, it's this one was a new one that Baker Creek provided and or sold last year. This was a real good grower. The Candy, pretty bean, and also just like that Ojo de Tiger semi-runner, super productive. Snowcap, pole bean that does well here too. Corona's purple. This was a little bit of a challenge. Again, probably one of those ones, from a more, moderate climate. Magpie, it's a slight bean, real skinny, narrow, just like the pods there, but a pretty neat color. Tiger, these are really fairly small beans, but again, as the description in where you can find them really makes up for productivity. That Potawatomi, which I talked a lot about, short season, easy grower, but pick them when they're ripe because they'll snap off. You even lay them in the sun and they'll sit there and they'll start popping. The Bamberger Blahs, to me, it's a really pretty bean with textures and colors. So, yeah, the rattlesnake, I say stub because there's two different varieties of rattlesnake. I noticed one was a little bit longer bean, but again, a really good snap bean, as well as a dryer. And the thing with the rattlesnakes, it was one that season-wise, you could keep picking, and I mean, you really want to stay on top of them, picking them to, keep the snaps coming. So this is the one that isn't a phaseolus. Cowpeas, when Linnaeus was naming them, from Africa. So this is a different genus here. That's something it's a bit of a challenge. I need to get some of these bush beans in sunnier spots, I know, but so there's not a lot of those, but I'm keeping them. This to me reminds me of the Monchella, but there are different. It looks a lot like it, and there are different varieties out there. So notice this one here too. This is Algarrobo, soldier or shroud bean, sometimes it's called. I think you can tell why that is. So it's confusing with that Ohio pole. The black on the Ohio pole's on the end. This is right in the center. This is that, again, it's Lowry Special Snap, actually. I will have to remember to try that as a snap and label it well. Uganda Bantu. They say there's a lot of diversity in the seed colors, and you'll see that in where they supply them, but the Ugandas were looking for that. Mabambo, in Kenya, Central Africa, Mabambo is like the creator god for them, believed to be a spirit that basically vomited up all of creation. So some of the, it sounds weird, it's their creation story. So some neat stories that tie in with the histories. This is one I have a very few of, but I'm really, the deep purple in this was just absolutely stunning this year. So I actually, to me, it looks like it has a little bit of a goat's eye cross. You can see that little stripe in there. So I think it may be, a cross with that or a variant of that, but I'm hoping this one stays true. So next year will be the first year, or this spring will be the first year of replanting that. This bird egg blue, took it 2 years to get a good crop of these, but well worth the wait. Just the absolutely stunning in bright sunlight. The Tuviguida, another Italian one that's real famous, real popular over there because of the thin skins and the smooth texture. But it's stated as pretty rare, but you can find them. This is that pink zebra. This is the one that really takes a long time, developed in China. So when you think about the beans, again, where they started 500 years ago, going to that Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Italy, and the 1,500-year-old cave bean coming out of New Mexico, found in a pot, covered with pitch. And so this one here, there's a neat story behind the Zuni Shilako. The Zuni people down in the Southwest, actually, I'm going to go back to that if I can stay. I don't know if it'll stay there, but they actually have a ceremony. The Zuni do. It's may you be blessed with light. It's the Zuni Indians. Basically, that ceremony is celebrated around summer solstice and ensures the transformation of winter's death to spring's rebirth. And basically, it's to bless the Zuni people with light for another year. And the Shilako prayer, I think in these times when you look at the troubles in the world and what's going on, I really, can appreciate and take this to heart. Their prayers, we shall greet one another as kindred, and henceforth as kindred, talking kindly to one another, we shall always live. May you be blessed and talk kindly, for we shall always live. So that's the good time. Yeah, putting this together, it was a lot of fun. So if there are any questions, or if you want to come up and look at some beans, I do have some seed packets here, a few of them, and feel free to take more pods, but certainly I'd entertain questions.
Any that grow for a longer, or you said a couple names of some that grow for a long, or that produce pods for a longer period of time. Do you remember?
Yeah.
More than one? Or?
Well, so a lot of these I'm growing for the dried purpose. They're basically letting the plant grow. But some of the ones that when if you're looking for snap beans, again, continuing that harvest, and a few pulled, some on a cattle guard, these rattlesnakes, yes, throughout the summer. I'm trying to stay after the harvest so they're not maturing, keeping them growing. I don't know about this Lowry Special. And I forget which, there are some other ones here that I know they're labeled as snap or, dried beans. But again, it gets a lot to that, what's that outer, I would think like the Good Mother Stallard. It's when you're shelling those, you're wearing out the skin on your thumb. So I wouldn't think that it would be a great snap bean. But in essence, any of them really could be. But yeah, that rattlesnake's one.
I just have one person who's a nuisance in the audience.
That's not a nuisance. To me, it's a, and if you think about beans and where they originated, think about again, why the Zuni, we got to get past winter solstice. So, what a better way, whether it be clay pots or baskets, a way to store food and and the digestive quality. Go ahead and back that up here.
We're kind of going into a dry year. Do you recommend any variety of bean for, well, let's say if we don't get the rain we're not getting right now? Is something would be better to plant than others?
As far as I think some of these beans, like the Ojo de Cabras, the goat, the eye of the goat or eye of the tiger, those ones, that Good Mother Stallard seems to be well suited. The Potawatomi, would be those would be some good ones. I think any of the African ones like the Uganda Bantu or the Mabambo would be good. Certainly if you can't water, You might, as hot as it gets, I'll have to try some of those temporary beans, the ones basically that are grown in the desert Southwest. I found a site where you can get those. And so if you have any questions about sources to it, there is a gentleman again in Chicago who really, I have a collection. He makes this look small, but he'll supply, it's his passion. And some of the beans that, that non-Agnes, the Grandma Agnes's bean that came from Serbia, some neat corns from there. So yeah, lots of different sources potentially up here.
So all the beans you can eat or not?
Yeah, none of these you can't. Yeah, none of these are casters or anything like that.
Those, if you were to dry, you could cook those and eat just the common green bean.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could certainly do that.
Never done that. Only ever eaten them as fresh.
Yeah, yeah. No, you certainly could. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
That's
See, I
nice.
learned something new.
yeah. That's right. Good.
I learned what.
Yeah, me too.
Hyacinth bean, they told me at Gurney's, from Jake Gurney's place, they said, be sure you research that before you eat it.
Yes.
And I haven't eaten it. I did try a bunch of them, but I don't know if they're concerned that they're hallucinogen or what.
Yeah, some of those hyacinths, I think Jay's right, probably that you would want to look into what that's from, because they there's a reason they domesticated it. It wasn't just for pretty, and I mean, they are consumed, but again,
They are really, I mean, when they bloom, it was
Yeah.
just like light purple.
Yeah,
All,
yeah.
Everything was loaded with light purple flowers.
Yep.
There's the shells
And
cut them.
their pods are like purple velvet.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's
well,
a-
yeah, and then they dry it like 5 minutes. I
Yeah.
thought I was just here.
Yeah, so yeah, I haven't grown. I know there was some out there that's, in partly, I mean, I'm looking for, I realize that hyacinths could be, I wouldn't want to mix them up with some of these edible ones. Yeah.
Before you eat any of it.
Yeah,
Well, I don't
Yeah.
wake up with schizophrenia tomorrow.
Come on, Kathy.
So Wayne, what is your favorite bean to eat?
As far as, when like I said, I like eating snap beans, this rattlesnake. It was great to go out to the garden and eat those. Lots of times I will simply go to my basement and I'll just go through and grab a mix. But, if you want, again, do they taste different? That's a common question. A lot of times when you're making beans too, it's a ham hock or whatever spices, leeks you're putting in there. So they really do pick up taste. But texture wise, if you want some more texture, things like the Good Mother style, retain some of it. Whereas like this, the Tiger or the Candy, they soften up a bit. I do want to test out some of these Tavicolitas, the Italian ones, on their own because of what they say about the skin texture being a little bit finer. Yeah, to me, they all offer something different, but most of the time I'm mixing at least 7 or 10 varieties. I did put together a jar this morning. This actually has 53 varieties. Yeah, but it's kind of pretty because again, as I said at the start, the world, where are these, again, where do these beans come from? You think about the history behind them and the cultures that have developed them, and and again, what they mean to people as far as sustenance. And so, yeah.
Any disease or pest issues we should be aware of?
Yeah. Again, as a master gardener, I would look that up, but I can't think of the name of it right now, but like where you see that rust developing, that's why I say the watering. What is it? Do you know it offhand? One of them starts with an A, but that's not this year, but last year, 2020. There was a stretch in June where we had about 4 or 5 days of rain. I can't remember what that's like hardly, but I know really throughout part of my garden, because of the density of beans, that's where I really learned, okay, you got to space these out more, give them room. But sometimes you can't control that moisture coming in when it's coming from the sky. But that rust really started. I started treating with copper sulfate a bit. It helped a bit, but so that's something, and some of the, I can't remember which beetles it is, but early in the season, there can be some of those issues too. So I have chickens in the garden. Yeah. And that's one of the things in researching this, obviously, is I started going down some, from Pope Clement to, it's amazing the amount of work that's done. And it's in part because it is an important food crop. But then a lot of the work is when you look at varieties and whatnot of beans, many of these beans, for instance, what's gone over to Europe and developed, the Italian beans, it's not a lot of ancestors or progenitors for those varieties that come from there. So then they look back to what can we learn? A lot of the research that goes on is now not only what can we learn, but how can we incorporate some of these other undomesticated wild varieties that are still out there? How can we protect them? Because they could hold some of the genetic material that helps with disease or pest, et cetera. Yeah.
Do you soak all your beans before you cook them?
There's a lot out there on that, and not always. No, sometimes. So Serious Eats is one of my favorite, cooking sites, and there's quite a bit out there on not really needing to soak them. One of the things I do, whether I soak them or not, is give them a quick boil. Get them boiling, then just put them on simmer. If, say I want to have bean soup at night, but again, it's always better the second day.
Serious Eats is the one you.
Serious Eats is a popular site for some of this that I look at. I mean, there's lots of good sites. That one's still free. Yeah. So cool. Cool beans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Anything else? Don't do what I do. No, and I look at this on really. I was looking back at pictures because for my garden, I chose to do beans because pre-COVID in 19, I did a talk just on heirloom gardening, but it's about that time I was getting into beans. But I do grow about 200 plus varieties of, like 30 varieties of tomatoes, about 40 varieties of peppers or so, and I've added the beans to list the onions and leeks, but it's just to me, it's so interesting to look at, again, not only the colors, the pretty, the table quality, but, the stories behind these. So, and yeah, you head down rabbit holes. So, yeah. Fun. Anybody have a bean they couldn't identify from the basket? No, I'm just curious. Oh, cool. Yeah, if you want to come up, look at these, grab a couple extra. Again, there's seed packets here.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming.
Thank you. They're all so beautiful. Wade, do you
Yeah.
have a source? I'm looking for where to buy soil for my raised beds in bulk. Do you have any?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Was there anybody online?
There were 5 of us, so 3 other people. So no one had questions, which was nice.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. So one of the places I would check is EU New Landscaping. He may have here.